Hey, welcome along. I saw this headline in the Washington Post a couple of weeks back, and it gave me a kind of a chuckle. Scientists are frantically copying US climate data, fearing it might vanish under Trump. And the Washington Post reporter says, alarmed that decades of crucial climate measurements could vanish under a hostile Trump administration, scientists have begun a feverish attempt to copy reams of government data onto independent servers in hopes of safeguarding it from any political interference. The efforts include a guerrilla archiving event in Toronto where experts will copy irreplaceable public data. Meetings at the University of Pennsylvania focused on how to download as much federal data as possible in the coming weeks, and a collaboration of scientists and database experts who are compiling an online site to harbor scientific information, etc., etc., etc. Got it? Washington Post headline spells it out. Scientists are frantically copying US climate data, fearing it might vanish under Trump. Trump's going to vaporize all the science, all the climate science, all the research into global warming because Trump hates global warming, so boom, he's going to destroy the science and it'll be vanished. It'll be lost knowledge, generations of lost knowledge, boom, vaporized. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the real problem is not Trump vaporizing the data, but the scientists. Dr. John Bates, a highly respected climatologist with NOAA, which is the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, gave an exclusive interview to the Mail on Sunday in London about what has been going on with the most respected climate bodies in America. And this is all to do with the run-up to the big climate conference and the big climate agreement in Paris. The problem with the global warming story has been there's been no warming for 20 years. There's been no warming this century. There's been no warming this millennium. If you believed things like Michael Mann's hockey stick that shows the temperature shooting up the top right-hand corner of the graph and out through the ceiling, the planet was supposed to be frying by now. And instead, the planet has not been frying. There's been a global warming pause, a cool. It hasn't continued to heat. And they were furious about this pause, the climate scientists, because the temperature, the planet, the temperature, the climate declined to do what their models said it was going to do. And so it's been a problem for them. And so just before Paris last year, NOAA came up with these new graphs that showed in fact, the pause never existed at all. You thought there was a pause, the temperature recordings indicated there was a pause, but then NOAA recalculated the numbers and suddenly, boom, the pause has gone. And Dr. Bates, in this interview with the Mail on Sunday, revealed that the failure to archive and make available fully documented data not only violated NOAA rules, but also those set down by the respected peer-reviewed journal Science. He continued to raise the issue internally at NOAA. And then came the final bombshell. Dr. Bates said, I learned that the computer used to process the software had suffered a complete failure. The reason for the failure is unknown, but it means the pause buster paper can never be replicated or verified by other scientists. This is huge news. If you recall the ClimateGate scandal at the University of East Anglia a few years ago, and if you know the story of Michael Mann and his hockey stick, and full disclosure, Michael Mann is suing me. The case is currently in its 5th year. I'll be lucky to live long enough to kick his ass in court, but I should, in the interest of full disclosure, get that out there, that the guy is suing me. But if you know anything about the Michael Mann hockey stick, if you know anything about ClimateGate at East Anglia, you'll know that the one thing these guys resisted was disclosing their data. Because the essence of science, of a scientific experiment, is that other scientists should be able to recreate the same conditions and see if they get the same results. And we now have it disclosed that because of the complete computer failure at the American government agency NOAA, their so-called scientific paper can never be replicated or verified by any other scientists. It was good enough for the world's leaders to meet in Paris and decide on a big new international climate agreement because of it, but it can't actually be replicated by other scientists because they fried the computer. They did what they did at ClimateGate in East Anglia. They did what Michael Mann's hockey stick did. They put the data beyond the reach of other scientists so that it could not be replicated. So in other words, to go back to that Washington Post headline, scientists are frantically copying US climate data, fearing it might vanish under Trump. No, US taxpayers should have demanded that NOAA's climate data be copied because in fact it has vanished in the hands of those so-called climate scientists. And it amuses me that the University of Pennsylvania, which is Michael Mann's, that's not Michael Mann's university, it's in the same state because he's at Penn State University. But it's amusing to me that the University of Pennsylvania is focused on how to save data from being lost. Because all they have to do is go and visit their colleagues at Penn State and talk to Michael Mann and his colleagues there who can tell you all about losing, misplacing, mishandling data. And this is interesting to me not just as a climate scandal, but it's what happens when everything becomes politicized. A scientific paper was produced not in the interests of science, but in the interests of politics. And so it produced the desired result at the Paris climate talks. And having produced the desired result in Paris, it doesn't matter now that it's been lost for all time. And as a piece of science is entirely useless. This is what happens when everything becomes politics. It corrupts the soul, politics. It's bad enough that politics has to be political. But when science becomes political, when the arts becomes political, when everything becomes political, social life, the civilizing forces in society become much smaller. And we've seen this in climate science now, where essentially the climate science establishment has decided to take one side in a political and public policy debate and seek the punishment of those who stand opposed to them. We're now seeing that narrow, reductive, ideological cleansing extended to other areas. And I use that phrase, ideological cleansing, intentionally. I'm opposed to ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, as happened during the Yugoslav Civil War. I'm opposed to confessional cleansing, when Muslims drive Christians out of Iraq and Egypt and the territories held by the Islamic State. And I am equally opposed to ideological cleansing, when the left demands that you cannot participate in science, when you cannot participate in the arts, when you cannot participate in commerce unless you agree with them politically. They've lately been trying to get Ivanka Trump's fashion line banished from stores. They've had some luck with Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus, and they've now moved on to Macy's. They want to get Ivanka Trump's fashion line kicked out of Macy's because she's the daughter of a president they disagree with. Do you follow that logic? If you happen to be the daughter of a president whom they oppose, you cannot make a product and sell it in Macy's. And I want to know whether that just stops at daughters of the president. If you're a cousin of the president, are you allowed to sell your commercial products at Macy's? If you're a second cousin of the president, if you're a second cousin 3 times removed, are you allowed to sell your commercial products at Macy's? This is the politicization of everything. And to their shame, companies such as Nordstrom are caving into this. We don't know whether Macy's will cave into this. But Nordstrom ceased carrying Ivanka Trump's line because they didn't want the political pressure. So now we're in a situation where you cannot even go to a crap hole emporium like Macy's without taking a political stand, because the left is demanding that ideological cleansing be extended to every area of life. That is why some of us believe in small government, because when government is small, politics is relatively unimportant. And 90% of life, you get on with your neighbors and your political differences with them don't matter this way or that way, because politics and government is a very small corner of your world. And it doesn't impact the sports you play, the movies you watch, the scientific experiments in the laboratory. When you have big government, everything is political. Politics becomes about everything. And that is why something that in a civilized society ought to be a relatively minor and inconsequential event, the swings of political fortune that result in Party A being removed from power and replaced by Party B until the pendulum swings again and Party A comes back. In a small government society, what's the big deal? You would have liked the other guy to win, but he didn't. So this fella's in for a few years, and it doesn't matter because most of life is unaffected by politics. The left says no, everything is political, everything is political. And so it's not just about a question of who sits in the legislature, it's a question of what fashion products you buy at Macy's. It's a question of what scientists are permitted to write in peer-reviewed scientific journals. It's a matter of what movies get made. It's a matter of what movie stars say about those movies. Everything becomes political. And there's a paradox about this, because the more that everything becomes political, the more trivial and unimportant and irrelevant becomes the central act of politics, which is the vote every couple of years. The left says everything's political. Macy's has to be political. Nordstrom has to be political. Neiman Marcus has to be political. Science has to be political. Movies have to be political. The one thing that doesn't matter is the people's vote in a political election and their political choice. A guy called Tom McClintock, a Republican congressman in California, he had his meeting bust up by leftist agitators a couple of days ago. And one of them said this is a very interesting quote that was in the paper. "I can no longer just sit back. I believe in the Constitution. I was an infantryman in Vietnam. I fought for this. These people need to understand we want them out," said Vietnam War veteran Lon Varvel, referring to Trump and McClintock. So this guy fought in the Vietnam War, Lon Varvel, and he says he fought for the Constitution. He is subverting the defining act of the Constitution, which is that the people choose their representatives under the constitutional order of this republic. McClintock won his election in California. He won it very convincingly over the other guy. He got roughly twice as many votes as the other guy. He's a very popular fella in that particular congressional district. Trump won the election decisively under the rules of presidential elections in the United States as they have been fought since the birth of this nation. And this guy, Lon Varvel, who says he believes in the Constitution and he fought for it in Vietnam, now he's saying, screw that, screw your Constitution. I don't care. To me, you're the enemy. You're no different from those fellas I fought in Vietnam. I want them out. I lost the election, but I want the winners out. I lost the election and I want the winners out. And there's a lot of talk like this. There's a lot of talk like this. Because, as I said, it's the paradox that when everything becomes political, when a presidential daughter cannot sell her commercial products in Macy's, when climate science becomes political, when everything is political, the one thing that is politically irrelevant to these people is the actual political process of participating in and winning elections, which is what the losers, which is what Lanvavel is. He's a loser. He lost. And he should actually stay home and ponder why he lost and why he's a loser. But he doesn't do that. He wants instead to overturn the result of the election, which is not a constitutional act. It is a subversive act. And it's interesting to me how much these guys mean it. This guy is a veteran. Maybe he does mean it. Maybe he's serious about getting people out. I think a lot of the other guys, the younger guys, Generation Snowflake, I think that's just like posturing. I don't think they're violent. They're anonymously violent. They'll put on hooded masks and punch women in the face, punch weak people in the face, and they'll do a little bit of that. But they're not really serious about revolution, are they? I don't know. They're fantasizing about it, and for some of them, the more fevered these fantasies get, the more the temptation to act on them will be. George Orwell has got a big bestseller at the moment because everyone's buying 1984 because they seem to think that Trump is going to bring about the world of 1984. George Orwell is a great writer, and it is a terrific shame to me that he is known only as the author of 1984. And so if we're going to make George Orwell a bestseller again, Steve Saylor reminded me the other day in something he wrote about a much more relevant book by George Orwell to the moment we're in. It's a novel he wrote called Coming Up for Air, which he published in June 1939 in London, 3 months before the outbreak of the Second World War. And I always liked this passage in which the protagonist goes to a public meeting at which a well-known anti-fascist is speaking. And he starts thinking about the guy who's talking and the audience and his impact on the audience. And he says, "It's a queer thing, I thought, to be known as Mr. So-and-so, the well-known anti-fascist. A queer trade, anti-fascism. This fellow, I suppose, makes his living by writing books against Hitler. But what did he do before Hitler came along? And what'll he do if Hitler ever disappears? Same question applies to doctors, detectives, rat catchers, and so forth, of course. But the grating voice went on, and another thought struck me. He means it. Not faking at all, feels every word he's saying. He's trying to work up hatred in the audience. But that's nothing to the hatred he feels himself. Every slogan's gospel truth to him. If you cut him open, all you'd find inside would be democracy, fascism, democracy." Interesting to know a chap like that in private life. But does he have a private life? Or does he only go round from platform to platform working up hatred? Perhaps even his dreams are slogans. Perhaps even his dreams are slogans. George Orwell, Coming Up for Air, written 3 months before the outbreak of the Second World War. What would the anti-fascists do if Hitler disappeared? Well, Hitler has disappeared, and we have anti-fascist movements now going around in black masks, smashing windows, beating people, living their dreams in slogan. Love trumps hate. Love trumps hate. Smash the window because love trumps hate. Put on a black mask. Bully a girl who supports Trump because love trumps hate. Punch her in the face because love trumps hate. the fevered dreams of people who live their lives in slogans. Something has gone kind of screwy in the reaction to the swings and roundabouts and the fortunes of democratic elections. This is not a normal way for the losing party to behave in a functioning society. And even if they remain fantasies, as many fantasies do, there are all kinds of people who have lurid sexual fantasies and never act upon them. But as the doctors will tell you, those fantasies in and of themselves are not healthy. And when you have people, veterans who fought for the country, insisting that the free, fair election results of a representative republic be overturned, we are not in healthy times. And thus the great paradox. We have the politicization of everything and the delegitimization of politics and the political process, and the very defining act of politics, a free and fair vote. That's the world the left has brought about. We'll see you next time.